The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Let's go. It's time for weekly edition. I had forgot my own name there for just a minute. Kip Kiefer with you on Need to Know. I always appreciate everybody tuning in and hearing my thoughts and hopefully clarifications, different perspectives that maybe had not occurred to you, especially if you're reliant on mainstream or what's now called legacy media for your information, or TikTok or one of the online services. It's really kind of hard to get the whole story now because everything is distorted to fit within the prism of whatever the viewpoint of the entity providing the information, or more specifically, the person providing the information. If you're new to the program, what you need to know, in my opinion, is kind of a right to the point, honest assessment of what's happening with our country, with our government, with all of the things political. Unfortunately, politics continue to dominate the landscape, and it's just one of those realities that we have to deal with. That everybody in America has to accept, and I think many people now have gotten the memo that everything that's happening in this country is really based on the amount of benefit that's within all of the issues for the various parties. And when I say parties, I don't mean political parties, because if you listen to this show, you know that I have disdain for both parties for different reasons. And I think that a lot of the people that are supposedly on different sides of the quote aisle are really on the same team, because they're all riding the same gravy train. They're all having their pockets stuffed full of checks. They all have the ability to go into a career in Congress or one of these bureaucratic positions that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, that becomes just a seat on the ultimate gravy train, because you've got money funneling in from all different directions. But unfortunately, that money is mine, yours, and everybody in your family, everybody you know. Anybody who earns a paycheck and sees that big deduction every week at what goes to Washington, these people are supposed to be the stewards and the caretakers of our financial contribution to this country. And it is no longer, as I always say, public service. It is now self-service. And going to give you a little more clarity today on that particular subject. Let me start by saying, if you are a Democrat, these are some sad times. These swamp monster Democrats are freaking out in Washington. It continues. They are in attack mode, when the attack is almost like a bunch of toy soldiers taking on a bunch of real tanks, because they really don't have a leg to stand on. When they stand in front of the Department of Education or the headquarters of FEMA and sing protest songs from the early parts of the 1900s that were crafted by workers who were being abused because there were no employment provisions or laws. There was no overtimes. There was, I mean, you worked when your boss man said you had to work, and they paid you what they were willing to pay you, until the birth of labor unions in this country. The workers were an exploited class, and a lot of this trying to hearken back to that era by current government employees and, more importantly, your elected officials on the Democrat side standing in front of agencies that are targeted for major reforms or even closures because they're totally inefficient, they're completely fraudulent, they are wasting your money, and more importantly, you always hear fraud and waste. Those are the two things. Well, they're trying to uncover fraud and waste. Let me tell you the biggest thing they're trying to put a stop to. THEFT, 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 theft. This money is being stolen from these agencies because you hear all of the griping. Congress allocates the money. This is a congressional issue. The White House and Elon Musk, Trump's henchman that he's hired, who AOC called a stupid man, the stupidest billionaire she's ever known. It's pretty amazing that AOC, a former bartender who represents the district in the Bronx in New York, not exactly a Rhodes Scholar. She once said that the unemployment numbers were being reduced in the first Trump administration because people had two jobs. That doesn't factor into the situation. Those statistics are not based on multiple jobs. It's who has a job. So she doesn't really know anything she's talking about. She told you 6 or 7 years ago that if we don't immediately reverse the trend of this planet, climate change would kill us all within 10 to 12 years. Well, we're about 2/3 of the way, and I don't see any major alterations. This is somebody who is just an ideologue who basically is coached up to say what she wants to say. And this is a person that called Elon Musk a stupid billionaire. This is a guy who our government now is begging to get a rocket ready to go into space and rescue 2 astronauts that are stranded on the International Space Station because the government fouled up the plans to have them return safely to Earth at the end of last year. They're like 3 or 4 months into that extra time of staying on that station. And Elon Musk is called upon by our government to construct a rocket and go up there and bring those people home. And if that's not enough, Elon Musk also has come up with a company that's designed rockets, which, if you've ever gone to the Kennedy Space Center or other places, Huntsville's got a great space museum. There's a number of facilities. If you've seen one of those massive Saturn rockets or the big booster rockets of this era, you know that about 2/3 of it is just a giant vessel to propel that craft into space. And typically, for all the 50 years we've been in the space business, as soon as that does its job and fires its retro rockets, which pushes the control capsule into an orbit in outer space, it used to just fall away and go into the ocean, burn up on reentry pretty much, and not be salvageable. Elon Musk said that's a waste of millions and millions of dollars. So this is a guy whose company came up with the idea to, when these boosters on these rockets do their job and detach and fall back to Earth, they now survive reentry and are able to be guided back to the launch pad area where they have the capacity with this giant array that's really hard to describe, but they basically catch the booster as it returns to the ground. This is who she calls the stupidest billionaire in the world, a guy that has amassed the biggest fortune in the world. It's unbelievable that somebody who was pushing drinks across a bar in the Bronx 7 or 8 years ago is calling out Elon Musk for being, quote, stupid. That just kind of frames it up for you. But the stupid work he's doing now is because he does business in this country. He's a naturalized citizen. He can't be president. He was born in South Africa. He will never be president. That's not the aspiration. People say he's the co president now, that Trump has ceded all of his power to Elon Musk, which is asinine if you know anything about Donald Trump. That's the last thing he's going to do. I don't care who it is. Donald Trump is in charge, and Elon Musk is working at his pleasure as a volunteer because his expertise in running businesses and making money and doing things efficiently is exactly the formula that this mess in Washington that we call a government is. So if you're a Democrat right now, man, I feel for you, because you are on a team where America has strongly stated their opinion, almost at the levels of 75-25 or even 80-20. All of these situations involving the border, involving all of the illegal criminals that are allowed to just stroll into this country and set up shop in every major city. All of these bureaucrats in Washington who are spending billions of dollars of your money to house these people, fly them wherever they want to go, put them up in luxury hotels, pay for their children's education, their 3 squares a day for food. It's costing billions of dollars. And a lot of that money, it has been uncovered in this brief 4-week period since Donald Trump was inaugurated for office, that the situation in our government where we're $36 trillion in debt emanates a lot from the way that government money is just frittered away on all these ridiculous causes. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is in place to get money from Congress and be there on the scene at natural disasters, the LA fires, the horrible hurricane flooding damage in Western North Carolina that left so many people destitute and homeless. That was almost 5 months ago, and people are still living in tents. Remember Alejandro Mayorkas, the worst government hire of all time, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, saying back in about November, well, we're trying to get more funding from Congress because we don't have any money right now to send to aid people in Western North Carolina. Also, at the same time, you had supervisors on the ground that had marching orders from somewhere in Washington that if you come upon a house that's damaged that has any evidence of support for Donald Trump, like a Trump campaign sign, an American flag, gasp. Imagine displaying an American flag. What kind of people are living here? The orders from Washington, after they said we don't have any money to help anybody, was to just skip those houses and move on to the next one. That's the corruption level and the level of complete ruin that your government and FEMA had reached. Now we find out the reason that despite Congress allocating tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to FEMA for relief of these kind of crises, the reason they didn't have any money at the end of the year was because FEMA saw clear to be financing in huge chunks money to house and educate the children and feed people that were here illegally, that crossed the border, illegal migrants, particularly in New York City. Just last week, despite an order not to do so, FEMA sent a check for $59 million to a couple of hotels in New York that they had basically bought out to house illegal migrants. So while people in North Carolina, American citizens who have paid taxes on their earnings their entire lives, while they live in tents in sub-freezing conditions in the middle of winter, hoping that the government responds and starts to rebuild their homes and their lives. They can't take care of those people, but they can send 59 million, which is only a drop in the bucket. The last payment was 90 million from FEMA's allocation from Congress to New York City, to luxury hotels, and also to different the breakdown was about 35% was to hotels for housing, for food and services and security. It was almost 50% of the money, and the other 15% was spread around to various programs to educate people that are in this country illegally on exactly how to petition the system for more support. So your money is being sent to take care of people that are not from this country, that are here illegally, and we are forsaking the needs of the people that are really in emergency situations, who did not choose to have a bizarre hurricane completely wipe them out in the unlikely, nowhere near the ocean spot of Western North Carolina. And those people still are struggling mightily because we're using all the emergency management dollars to take care of illegals in this country. It's absolutely unconscionable. So the Democrats are out front singing, and one of the songs, and I'm not familiar with those, despite rumors to the contrary. I wasn't around for the turn of the century in the 1900s, protests and workers' rights and forming of labor unions. I wasn't here, so I was not familiar with the song. It's something to do with choosing your side, which basically was, are you with the workers or are you with the millionaires who are abusing them with their corporations? And basically, it was a big three at that time. Andrew Carnegie, who was the steel baron. Of course, you had John Rockefeller, who was the founder of Standard Oil as the country had made a transition to cars from horses. And of course, J.P. Morgan, one of the great financial wizards of all time. His J.P. Morgan Chase Bank still in existence today. Those three pretty much controlled everything. And it became a golden era economically for Americans because the policies that their choice for President William McKinley instituted really brought the country to a whole different economic level in terms of its wealth and power around the world. But of course, a lot of that was on the backs of the people working in the factories and needing to be represented and have their rights taken care of, and it was a righteous cause. But how that applies to government workers who are more than 2 million strong in the federal government, the most behemoth, runaway, bloated operation in the history of mankind, that just has an unlimited supply of money pouring in to keep it supported. I like my favorite quote that's come out of this week was Maxine Waters last week, also just excoriating Elon Musk. Elon Musk, nobody voted for you. What are you doing there? This is a constitutional crisis. You're basically the president. You have no right to be involved in any of this. She's chastising the guy for volunteering his time to find waste and fraud. And as I said at the top, theft, because get that in your head. Waste and fraud sound bad. Theft sounds worse. They found one woman who worked at one federal agency that somehow over a 20-year career was able to siphon off $30 million for herself. And she walked away, and to this day has not been prosecuted, although it took the Musk team about a week to uncover that scandal. There are all kinds of different horror stories of agencies misplacing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. There are just unbelievable. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. abuses and outright theft. That's what it boils down to. Not to mention the fact I told you way back when I first heard of this Musk involvement, it was going to be of Vivek Ramaswamy at that time too, but he's decided now he wants to run for governor of Pennsylvania. So he's not involved, but Musk has brought in all these computer whiz kids who can basically find just about anything online. And Washington does have a digital footprint. All these agencies have to each year apply for what funding they want, and they have to disclose some amount of information, although Congress doesn't pay any attention to it, because if you've listened to the show, you know how that works. Congress is supposed to have all the budget appropriations done by the end of September because the new fiscal year in the country starts in October. Well, guess what? They, for about 15 or 16 years running, have not made that deadline a single time. They instead pass what's called a continuing resolution and send that down the road about 45 days, which coincidentally puts it right into about Christmas season when everybody is ready to get out of Washington. And despite Donald Trump being elected in November, they tried once again the same old tactic to do what's called an omnibus spending bill, which they draft about a week before Christmas and pressure everybody. We're going to get it to you on Monday. We're going to vote on Wednesday. This year's was 1,700 pages long, and it described funding for all of these agencies, all of these bureaus, all of these departments, for all of these unnecessary government workers. There was a threat that the Republicans may let the government shut down in protest if they were being forced to sign this spending bill. There was outrage. I heard one Republican, Tom Barrasso from Wyoming, come on one of the news shows and say, now, this is not going to affect any essential government employee. They're all going to get paid. Everybody on that is dependent on government, Medicare, Social Security, those checks will go out. But the key word, this is not going to affect any essential government workers. Well, that means all the non-essential ones aren't going to get paid, but why are they getting paid anyway if they're non-essential? It's just common sense, folks. It's not rocket scientist. You don't even have to be as smart as AOC to really understand the situation. So all of this is being called out, and I told you at that time that people were thinking this was just to identify the really ridiculous things that the government, through some of these agencies, a lot of times cronyism, somebody you know has got some big project where they're injecting tuna with cocaine to see if it affects their behavior, and it only comes at the price of $500,000 a year to do this research and publish a paper on it. A lot of people just figured it would be nonsensical stuff like that. And I told you way back, right after the election, the potential for this thing is huge because this government has gotten so corrupt and so run away, so contained, and so full of itself and its ability to get away with sheer theft, stealing mine and your money for their own purposes. If you don't believe me, drive around Washington, D.C. and the suburbs and into Northern Virginia. You will see one after another these opulent, unbelievable gated communities where it's multi-million dollars communities. Every house is $4, $5, $6 million. It'll just take your breath away to see how people in Washington and Northern Virginia are living. And these are not the elected politicians who we know are getting huge campaign contributions, kickbacks from all kinds of special interests, and circling back around all of the money that they allocate to all of these various agencies, bureaus, departments, who then give the money to what's called NGOs, non-government organizations. Believe me, a lot of that money comes home to roost and ends up in the pockets of these same congressional folks who are representing the special interests that continue to fund them. That's how Maxine Waters, who represents Watts, one of the poorest districts in the whole country, Maxine Waters he lives in a $4.5 million mansion in Hancock Park, the swankiest part of LA. These people, like Harry Reid in Nevada, went in 2 years after bankruptcy, won a Senate seat in Nevada, retired 33 years later, worth $60 million net worth. How does that happen on a salary of about 180 grand a year as a senator? Why aren't Americans outraged? Americans are finally waking up to what's going on, that this is just a giant slush fund. All of these agencies, like the USAID, which was supposed to be a foreign aid bureau, is working to distribute money all around the world, not to American citizens who are in desperate need. So many people in the inner city have serious economic problems, terrible education for their children, awful security and safety issues, these murder fields in South Chicago, and even here in Birmingham on the west side of town. We don't even blink when we hear about shooting violence and gun violence every single weekend. These people deserve better. They're Americans. They should be the first priority, not some regime across the globe that is, from philosophical or ideological or humanitarian or whatever, is aligned with the woke thinking of these left-wing people that are controlling these NGOs and hiding behind the veil of charitable distribution, when what they're really doing is undermining the policy of a lot of the governments in the countries that they're pumping money into by funding the regimes opposite. And Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, said it. In so many circumstances, they are working counter to the policies of the U.S. government. So basically, you've got the U.S. government funding one side, one faction of a situation. Syria is a great example. Syria just recently collapsed as terrorists basically ran out the corrupt leader, Assad, of Syria, but we had funding going to both sides of that conflict. And it's just unbelievable what's going on. I'm just scratching the surface. I could talk about this all day long, but remember, what's happening in Washington right now is basically what every business has to undergo. It's an audit. And people say, well, government isn't business. I stand to tell you that it is the biggest business, because it is all about the money. It's all about the cash. It's all about enriching the people involved. That's why all of these people are fighting like tigers, because basically the framers did not see this fourth branch of government. And we don't kid yourself. We do have four. You say, well, we have executive, the presidency, we have legislative, Congress, the Senate, and we have judicial, which are judges. And those judges basically are put in place to settle disputes between the other branches and to clarify the constitutional intent of our founders. So that's the three forms of government. But the Democrat Party has meticulously built this unbelievable multi-million people network of all of these bureaus and departments and agencies and all of these affiliates who are actually making the policy. They talk about Musk being unelected. The people writing the rules, the regulations for the Environmental Protection Agency and all of the departments in the Homeland Security branch, and even the FBI and the CIA in our intelligence areas. These people are not elected, and they are the policymakers. They are the government right now. It's the fourth branch of government, the administrative state. And none of the entities that are involved here are even mentioned in the Constitution. There was no provision for a Department of Justice. There was no Environmental Protection Agency. There was no FEMA. There was no, just pick one. No Department of Education, certainly, who is just a shill for the teachers union, which is one of the most powerful entities in the country right now, and making a lot of the decisions that you and I have to live with every day. And it's just a situation where do your own reading, pay attention, because this is not anyone going after anything that needs to be salvaged. This is non-essential parts of our government that are spending so much money that we are 36 trillion dollars in debt. And $1 trillion, if you can't comprehend what that means, $1 million is a lot of money. 1,000 million is a billion, and 1,000 billion is a trillion. So think of about a stack in a big room in a giant vault of $1 billion in cash, and times that by 1,000. That's $1 trillion. If that puts it in perspective, hopefully it's an elementary example, but it was the best way I could think of to really get everybody to get a grasp on how much money we're talking about and the unbelievable waste, fraud, and abuse, and even more theft is happening in this country. It's astounding. It's staggering. It needs to be fixed because we don't need to live in a country that completely ignores the fact that we, the people, are supposed to run this government, and the people that really run it are not people that you select. They are people that get these lifetime appointments, and that's why they're fighting like tigers to keep it. And the Democrats are really, despite the fact that they are on the wrong side of every issue, and that's not my judgment, that's the judgment of the American people, when they favor this mutilation of children, making a decision before they're even in the second or third grade that I'm really a boy, not a girl, and they are mutilated and made lifetime patients by the health care system, which should be called the sick care system, because they're not in the business of health. They're in the business of treating illness and creating multi-gazillion dollar products to address all of these things that this government corruption has wrought in terms of the Americans' health. So the bottom line is this is everybody's fight. Everybody needs to get involved. It's not a partisan issue. The Democrats are fighting like crazy because this is their creation. This is a branch of government that can never change. The executive, a president, sometimes it'll be a Republican, sometimes it'll be a Democrat. The same in the Senate and the House. They're all subject to change. But the one department of government that was never intended to be in existence, the administrative state, the bureaucratic nightmare that Washington, D.C. is, it is 100% a creation of the left-wing faction of the Democratic Party. And meticulously, the building blocks were put in place in 8 years of Barack Obama. And now it's time to tear it down. It's got to go. It is not America. It does not stand for any constitutional muster. And it's just got to go. And whatever methodology we can do to take a wrecking ball to this bureaucratic runaway train that's Washington, that's wasting all of our money and putting all of our children and grandchildren in debt for the entirety of their lives, has got to be reversed. We've got to get back on the right course. And it's critical that all of you make sure that you call your representatives in Congress or write them an email, particularly the Republicans, because they have a grand opportunity right now to pass all kinds of legislation and really get this train rolling. But you've got maverick guys. They're saying, well, I'm not comfortable with this and I don't like that. But if they act like that and do not work as a team and accept the mandate that the American people gave this president to fix this country, if they continue to balk and not cooperate and not get this majority situation that's very rare and take full advantage of it by reversing the policies of these corrupt governments that we've all had to be subjected to, this is the time. And if those guys don't get off their ass, and these are Republicans I'm talking to, put your pride aside, put your stupid ideas, get the big bills passed, get the tax cuts for American, get the unlimited energy exploration parts, build new refineries. Let's spend some money not on putting it in corrupt people's pockets, but on the American people to make prices better, to make life better in the United States. I'm Kip Kiefer. That's what you needed to know. It's not a good time to be a Democrat, but it's a great time to be an American. So get on board, call your representative, or email them today, especially if you're in a Republican district, and tell them to get off their ass and jam. We'll talk to you next week.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.